I met a guy when I was 18 and fell in love fast and hard. We dated, moved in together, got engaged, and eventually got married. But every time we took a step forward into our relationship, he got a little bit meaner. However, it was just enough to make me think that perhaps I was being a bit too overly sensitive. So I brushed it off. It'd be little things, like he'd yell over dumb stuff, or start hitting the walls when I made him mad, or fight me on really small things. He'd also become a lot rougher when we would play around, to the point where he once actually pinned me down and tried to suffocate me with a pillow. I was young, dumb, and in love, and believed him when he said he was sorry and that he was just messing around. His drinking also picked up quite a bit. He got angry when I said anything, so I held my tongue. On Christmas Eve 2011, he drank so much that he passed out in his mum's foyer. I spent the night cleaning up his puke so that he wouldn't drown his face in it, and dodging his fists whenever he realized I was nearby. I cried as he said some of the worst things he'd ever said to me, but I stayed because we hadn't been married all that long. Fast forward to my 26th birthday party in January 2012. We went out with some friends and had a great night. That is until someone asked me a question about sports. I don't really pay attention to them, but my husband started screaming at me for being a fat, ignorant bitch because I didn't remember the score when the Giants won the World Series. Seriously. On the way home, he brought it up again. Then, in a fit of rage, swerved our car into oncoming traffic. Luckily, I pulled the wheel back in time so that we weren't hit, and it was a close one, and I did my best to calm him down. When we got home, he was still furious and began throwing things and screaming at me. He opened the knife drawer, and I booked it upstairs and locked myself in the guest bedroom. After 15 minutes of pounding and kicking on the door, he gave up and drank until he passed out. Over the course of the next 5 days, my friends came over to help me move out while he was at work. I filed for a divorce, and the twat had fought me every single step. I'm still waiting for the divorce to be finalized, but now I have an attorney to do my fighting for me. Douche.
When I was younger, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 14. It was very difficult for me to socialize with people in person, so I turned to the internet. There, I stumbled into the world of toy-based role-play. It became my passion and even set me on the path towards becoming the artist I am today. My original interest was Dragon Age, and I joined an RP group on DeviantArt. I loved that group and spent all my time in the IRC chat, which naturally led to a decline in my grades. But I met Michael after I gained a bit of an interest in Slenderman. I had stumbled across the blog space RP world of Slender blogging and followed as many as I could, dedicated a Gmail to it, and dived in, creating my own Slender blog. I played a character that was basically myself, even sharing my own name. I would even frequently post little videos of myself running through the woods, or even just talking to the camera. Michael was another player and his character was on the enemy team. You see, I played what was known as a runner, or someone who was fleeing the eldritch horror, and he was a proxy, which is a servant of Slenderman. The kicker was that he was more than just a grunt, and was basically one of Slenderman's elite soldiers. Regardless, We ended up chatting over email, but he never broke character, so I didn't either. We continued to play with each other for over a year, before I ended up breaking character to another player, who was friends with Michael as well. He, of course, immediately told Michael, "Oh my god, she's not insane," as we had all kinda thought everyone else actually thought this stuff was real. So Michael messaged me, excitedly announcing that he wasn't insane. We quickly became pretty close personal friends, and referred to that moment as the best moment in RP history for most of the time we knew each other. We talked on an almost daily basis, and he always seemed to go out of his way to match my schedule, even though he lived 2 hours behind me. And I was a 15-year-old high school student by this point, so I was getting up at 5:30 every morning to go to school. He was pretty honest with his age, and being mature for my age, it didn't bother me that he was 19, almost 20, and I was 15. It was pretty close to the end of the year when we started talking out of character, so summer break came quickly. That just opened the door to us talking all the time. I remember one night he convinced me to stay up and video chat with him for the first time. I'd never actually seen his face before, and I was ecstatic. I hid in my closet and we talked all night. My dad busted in at 4 in the morning and confiscated my computer, which I was not allowed to have in my room at night after that point, but I just ended up giving Michael my phone number and we grew closer. Later, I told him that I didn't think he was capable of surprising me, and he responded by asking me out. Being a 15-year-old girl, I was ecstatic. My friend did well to ground me and think it through, and he'd be nothing if not a gentleman to me. So after a 45-minute walk with my friend, I called him and ecstatically told him yes. He had, during that time, sent me so many texts expressing his concern that he'd upset me. I ended up apologizing profusely for making him wait. The first few months were amazing. We were so close and talked every night on the phone, even sleeping while still in a call. I fortunately had unlimited text and call, but it got weird once the school year started back up. Over the summer, I'd been able to dedicate pretty much all of my time to him, and with school, it would limit the time we could talk to each other quite a bit. It didn't occur to me at all that talking to someone for near on 18 hours a day was an unhealthy dependency issue. So, we had our first argument about texting. He wanted me to text him whenever I wasn't able to be in call with him, but I wasn't allowed to text in class. We came to a compromise when I told him that I would text him between classes and call him at lunch. I didn't really have any friends at that school, and the ones I did have didn't share my lunch period, so it didn't affect my social life that much. It went well for a while, until I ran into an old friend from my middle school who happened to be a guy. I'd always gotten along better with guys than girls, but Michael freaked out. I had been on the phone when it happened and had brushed Michael off to talk to him. After my friend and I parted ways, I was harshly told off and told that I couldn't talk to other guys. I was completely shocked and tried to explain that the guy had been a friend of mine. Michael then had a complete breakdown and told me that his ex had cheated on him and that he couldn't trust any other guy to behave around me. He was terrified that I'd be stolen. He even cried. I was upset, but I agreed to mollify him and began to avoid my male friends whenever I was on the phone, which was a lot. Quickly, schoolwork got pretty heavy and it would take me longer and longer to call him after school. He began accusing me of not loving him enough to talk to him and claimed that he never had enough time with me. He gave me the option of texting him in class or calling him as soon as I got home from school. I went with the latter, which completely cut off any time that I spent with my family, save for a brief dinner, after which I immediately returned to my room. Things only escalated from there. I would get held after class for falling asleep because he kept me up all night, and he could explode at me for not contacting him the moment the bell was scheduled to ring. he had a written copy of my exact schedule to the minute, and any deviation would freak him out. I began pushing away all my friends as he didn't approve of any of them. He even claimed that a particular friend was the human personification of a demon that was trying to kill him. His mental state was revealed to be extremely fragile, and he told me that he had a second personality, whom was quite literally his Slenderman character named Strider. Michael spoke frequently of this constant battle to keep Strider under the surface, because while he wasn't a bad person, he was irrevocably a major douchebag. He blamed his outbursts on this character and even texted me in italics as Strider, as if his body has been taken over for the sole purpose of belittling a 15-year-old girl over the phone. I was sympathetic as my bipolar was at its worst and my therapist was whispering the word schizoaffective to my mother when she thought I couldn't hear. For the next year and a half, he played me like a puppet, distancing me from my family and friends, convincing me that the teachers only wanted to turn me into a mindless tool for the government, and persuading and coercing me into performing sexually for him. It felt disgusting, but he promised me that he'd marry me and would have beautiful children. He was frequently abusive, but he would quickly get better, and suddenly everything would be perfect again, until it deteriorated into another explosive argument. Eventually, he convinced me to call cops on my family and report them for abuse. Now, I won't claim that my family was perfect. My dad is an alcoholic and he could get really violent, and he and I had vicious arguments. My mother mostly just supported whatever my dad did, and I was always incredibly resentful that she wouldn't defend me, even when my dad slapped me, kicked me out of the house barefoot, and was generally overly aggressive to me. But they did care, and my home was clean, warm, well stocked with food. My sisters and I never really wanted for much physically, and we often got things we wanted to. The system would have destroyed my sisters, who were pretty young at the time. When my parents found out that I'd placed a call, I panicked and ran away from home, crashing at my friend's house. Michael wanted me to stay put until he could get a friend of his from Austin to come get me. But when I turned on my phone in the morning to see the text from my family and knew that I had terrified my sisters and the police had been called, I arranged for my dad to bring me home. I wouldn't let him pick me up from my friend's house because I knew he could threaten to sue her parents for assisting me. I served 6 months of juvenile probation and had to endure several meetings with a state-appointed therapist for falsely accusing my family of abuse, and my parents were subject to a second inquiry from CPS due to me running away. By the end, we were breaking up every other week and getting back together when he would send me pictures of terrible gouges in his arms, threatening to kill himself. I actively hated him by then, but still loved him and didn't want him to die. I escaped when he discovered that I'd been talking to a male friend who he particularly hated and dumped me on Valentine's Day. It took him 2 months to realize I wasn't coming back, but he would still try to text me, and I blocked so many numbers and email accounts because he would change them just to message me. It was completely terrifying, and I was constantly terrified because he knew my address. But eventually he disappeared, and I slowly started trying to put my life back together. About a year or so ago, he texted me and I indulged with him. He claimed that he'd been married. I really doubted it. Despite the single picture that he sent, I asked what date his wedding had been on. But he couldn't tell me, and first tried to claim that it had been in December, 2 months before he dumped me. When I called him on it, he backpedaled and got defensive. I blocked him after that, satisfied that he was still a miserable mess and that he hadn't snared another poor minor. So Michael, let's not meet.
I was engaged to my high school sweetheart, who I pretty much allowed to treat me like dirt. After high school, while we were living together, It was apparent that the relationship wasn't going anywhere, and I finally had the courage to end it. I was the one with the job and the money, so I was keeping the apartment and asked her to move out. I think I gave her about 2 weeks or something. Eventually, she shacked up with some guy and was out of my hair. Every now and then, she would pop in because she left all of her shit at my place while she was trying to find her new place. I kept hearing stories from everyone of her epic levels of sluttiness and just tried to stay away from it all as best I could. At some point though, out of anger, I went into her jewellery box and took the engagement ring that I had given her. It was several weeks before she realised it was gone, at which point I'd already sold it, and when she confronted me about it, I told her. She lost her shit. She started demanding that I give it back to her, or at least its value in cash. I told her that's not how engagement rings work and that she can go screw herself. She started hitting me and trashing my place. I didn't have to take it. She was smaller than I was, and I was a black belt, and I just let her take her anger out. She ripped my shirt, slapped me, punched me, kicked me, everything. Finally, she hit me square in the face and drove my head into the door behind me. On the other side of the door was a calendar hanging on a nail that struck through the door just a small amount, but enough to drive it to the back of my skull, and it really hurt. I just grabbed her hands to stop her from flailing about anymore and directed her over to the door. She could tell that I had lost my patience, so she just stormed out. About an hour after, she shows up with her mother and the police. The cops took my statement, took one look at me and asked if I wanted to press charges or if I needed an ambulance. I declined both, and then he escorted her and the mother off the property and advised that they take it up with a small claims court if they wanted to proceed any further. But it was more hassle than it was worth, and she didn't really break anything, just made a mess, and I had a cut on the back of my head, which looked worse than it was since it was bleeding pretty good. I just wanted her gone at that point.